Welcome, everyone, to the Kepler Conference Online Research Forums. I'm Courtney Roberts, and today we have a very special event. It's our second East Meets West Astrology Interactive Online, where we find out what happens when Western and Indian astrologers read charts together. You know, we started this in July, and to give credit where credit's due, it was all Jagdish's idea. But we were so overwhelmed with the support that we got in July, particularly from the Vedic astrologers, that we decided to do it on a more ongoing basis because it's just so revelatory. And over time, as we compile the observations and compile different people's answers to the questions, I think we're building up a really valuable mountain of useful information for the entire field. So everybody's been so helpful over the last 2 months or so in giving us good suggestions and input on how to design the forum, the protocols, which we're revising all the time, and also with the feedback. We're really looking for feedback on this session and the first session, the videos posted on our site, to really get people's takeaways and their conclusions from that. And that's the information that's really going to compile over time. We've probably got I think 4 more of these scheduled through the next 8 or 9 months. So, hi, Alan. there's, you never know with the Aries. Anything could happen. So we're gonna continue this process, and as I said, I think the observations and the really evidence-based takeaways are going to come out over time. But in the meantime, the whole point is that it's friendly, it's sociable, it's interactive, and we're all trying to work together to demonstrate what works and what works most efficiently and effectively in getting to the right answers. There's no one question that's going to solve that for us. It's very much an ongoing process. So I want to go ahead and get us started. And the format today is going to be, I hope, very simple. We've got 2 Vedic Indian astrologers, and that's going to be Richard, Alwin, Fidler, and Alan, Annand. They'll be presenting solutions from their Vedic Indian perspectives, which are not entirely uniform, okay? And then we've got 2 Western astrologers, Mitch and myself. Mitch will be providing answers to the questions. I'm running the whole thing, but I'm going to do a lot of synthesis of information in the dialogues that follow. We've got 2 questions today, and I think you've all probably seen them online or in the emails that we've sent out. The first one is about marriage charts. We've got 3 charts, and the question is, who's married to who? And then we've also got another question about professions. So we're going to start with the marriage question, and I am going to propose the order. We'll start with Richard to present a Vedic perspective, and then he'll have about 7 minutes to present his answers. Then we'll go to Mitch to present a Western perspective. He'll have about 7 minutes to present his answers. Then we'll go to Alan to present the Vedic perspective and his answers. He'll have about 7 minutes. And then we'll go into the wrap up and discussion. We'll actually reveal the correct answers and look at how people got there. I've got a compilation of solutions that have also been sent in from other people, either on social media or through email to me. So we've got some really interesting answers to look at. So let's get this rolling. We have 3 charts, chart 1, chart 2, chart 3. The question is, 2 of these people are married to each other with children. 1 is a stranger to the other. So, which is which? Richard, are you ready to roll?
I am.
All right, we're gonna clear the screen for Richard.
Okay, so to be honest, Courtney, I found this quiz more challenging than the others we looked at in the previous session. you know, in the previous session, I felt that the charts spoke to me kind of instantly, you know, and in this case, I find it quite a delicate, you know, complicated exercise. With chart 1 in particular, I'm aware of the fact that if the birth occurred only 10 minutes or so earlier, we'd have a different sidereal ascendant. It would become Cancer. You know, so I'm going to work with it as if, you know, we can rely on this birth time, but I am aware that there is that possibility that there could be a different ascendant. And, you know, this is always something that one has to bear in mind when working with whole houses, you know, that if you have a ascendant close to the cusp of signs, you know, you could end up having all the planets shift into different houses. But regarding this chart, the first thing that strikes me here is that you have Rahu in the 7th house with the Sun, and you know, there's nothing about that would negate marriage, but neither of those placements are particularly harmonious for marriage. Okay. Beyond that, Venus as a significator for marriage is also in the 6th house, right? Which is yet another factor that indicates some struggle in relationships or marriage, some strife. It could potentially even prevent marriage. I also see that Venus and Saturn are square. You know, and this is perhaps not a strictly Vedic approach. You know, in according to Vedic astrology's rules for aspects, that would not be, you know, Venus and Saturn wouldn't be an aspect. But I definitely draw on Western aspects in looking at charts. So that Venus-Saturn square, again, it's not the kind of thing that would negate marriage completely, but it does make it look a little bit less likely. I'm tempted to take chart 1 as the person who's a stranger to the others. In other words, the one who's not married to another. Now, chart 2. Can you see the diagram?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Chart 2 I find really interesting because this looks to me like a very lucky chart, if we could put it that way. You know, Jupiter is exalted in the 1st house, in mutual reception with the moon in the 9th house. So basically you've got Lord of the 1st house in the 9th and Lord of the 9th in the 1st. And that immediately suggests that this person is very noble, and would generally be blessed with you know, all the good things in life. You know, they'd be materially protected and would probably be able to manifest something like family life if they wanted to. And what reinforces that, in my view, is the fact that Jupiter from the 1st house would aspect the 7th house. Saturn, which would be the Lord of the 7th house, is exalted and conjunct Venus, which is a benefic. So that in itself is pretty good for you know, for the prospect of marriage. And very importantly, Venus creates the Mahapurusha yoga of Venus, called Malavya yoga, which occurs when Venus is in its own or exaltation sign, while also being in an angular house. And one of the traditional aphorisms for Malavya yoga, for having such a strong Venus, specifically refers to the fact that the person would have a spouse, would have children, would have, you know, good homes and all of that sort of thing. So this looks to me like a very promising chart in terms of the person's capacity to have a, you know, all-round very fulfilling life. Of course, Venus being so close to Saturn is conspicuous, and it's a bit of a conundrum here, because, you know, both Saturn and Venus are very well placed by sign, and it suggests that therefore some of the themes of obstructed love, for example, that we might get from Venus-Saturn conjunction might not be, you know, that severe. On the whole, it looks on balance like this person would have a family, and I also note that Mars is in its own sign in the 5th house. Now, normally, Mars in the 5th house would not indicate desire for children or likelihood of having many children. But the fact that Mars is in its own sign there, it's the fact that the Lord of the 5th is in the 5th, enhances the likelihood of children. I believe Prince Charles has a sidereal Cancer ascendant with Mars and Scorpio in the 5th. And what makes sense in his case is, having boys, since masculine children would seem to be slightly more likely than female children. So my feeling is that chart number 2 is one of the married people. Now, chart number 3 is interesting because there's certainly some factors here that indicate, problems in marital life, particularly having the South Node in the 7th house, and having Mars aspect the 7th house. In Vedic astrology, if Mars, aspects the 7th house, was located in the 7th house, it creates what is known as Kuja dosha. It's supposedly something that harms married life. But what we do also find here is a very close Moon-Venus conjunction that is trine Jupiter. So it's a very mixed set of indications here. Some of the very best indications of the capacity to create a happy, family life, as well as some very serious indications of marital strife. So it's a tricky one. I believe my friend Keith did point out on Facebook that chart 3's moon is conjunct chart 2's moon, which would also seem to be the kind of thing you could expect to find, as appropriate synastry between two people that are married. It could just be a coincidence, and perhaps perhaps that is just a coincidence, but it does look a little more likely then that chart 2 and 3 are the couple.
All right, and your time's just about up. You're doing pretty well. Is that your...
That's pretty much it.
That's your final answer. So he says chart number 2 and chart number 3.
Yeah.
And just to briefly kind of summarize what you were doing is looking at each chart individually and gauging their chances for marriage and children.
Right.
Right. Okay. And that's a really interesting approach. Thank you so much, Richard. Now we're going to go right to Mitch for a Western perspective.
All right. Well, I agree with Richard that this was a challenge. It's interesting that Richard did it from a different perspective than I did. Not meaning Vedic versus Western, but he effectively was trying to rule out who was not married, whereas I used the approach of trying to figure out who was most compatible for marriage. So the technique that I used a couple of techniques. First, I want to start off by saying that I use an equal house system. So the midheaven is distinct from the 10th house cusp. So when you see my charts, they'll look a little different than if I was using something like Cetus, where the 10th house and the midheaven would be together, fused together. I do this because for the same reason that Frank Clifford does it, and it was his argument that convinced me. The public image and the social status in the midheaven is distinct from the job or profession that way in the 10th house cusp. The two techniques that I used are synastry and composite chart. I looked for 3 things in these 3 charts in terms of compatibility. I looked for similarity of interest and temperament, and I determined that by looking at the planets in the same zodiac sign or a similar aspect, such as both people having a major aspect between the same 2 planets. I look at mutual kindness, friendliness, pleasantness, peace, and that comes from looking at trines, sextiles, noviles, binoviles, quad noviles of the moon, sun, Venus, Jupiter, or of Sun, Venus, between the two charts or in a composite chart. And I look at aggressiveness, competition, power, success, or violence. And those come from aspects of Mars to the Sun, Uranus, and Pluto, or of the Sun to Pluto between the two charts or in the composite chart. So the first two that I looked at are charts 1 and 2. The first thing that struck me when I looked at these charts was that they have Pluto and they have Neptune, both in Gemini, but that's not really a surprise, and that's not even misleading. They have Pluto and Neptune in Gemini because the births for these people are just a few months apart. One being born in December of 1895 and the other being in March of 1896. So generally, I only pay attention to the so-called generational planets, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, when they make an aspect to a personal planet. What did I see when I looked at number 1 and number 2? The similarity of interests and temperament is very high. Chart 1 has the Sun in Pisces and the Moon in Capricorn. Chart 2 has the Sun in Capricorn and the Moon in Pisces. I saw for mutual kindness, friendliness, pleasantness, and peace was also very high. There are plenty of trines between the two charts, and there are plenty of trines in the composite chart. I looked at the aggressiveness, the competition, power, success, violence. That's very low. Well, low to very low. And there's a relative absence of aspects of Mars to Saturn, to Sun, Uranus, Pluto, or of Sun to Pluto between the two charts and in the composite chart. I then looked at chart 1 and 3, and I found that the similarity of interest and temperament was not as high as 1 and 2. It was moderately high. Again, we have Sun in Pisces in chart 1 and Moon in Pisces in chart 2. Mutual kindness, friendliness, pleasantness, and peace is moderately high again. So there's plenty of trines between the two charts. There's plenty of trines in the composite chart. In terms of aggressiveness, competition, power, success, or violence, between chart number 1 and number 3 was the lowest among the pairs of charts, and it was very low. There's a relative absence of aspects of Mars to the Sun, Uranus, and Pluto, or of the Sun to Pluto between the two charts and in the composite chart. And then the next was to look at between charts 2 and 3. And there I find that there's a similarity of interest in mood and temperament that's moderately high. We have Moon in Pisces in both chart 1 and chart 2. There's a mutual kindness, friendliness, pleasantness, and peace that's moderately high. There's plenty of trines between the two charts. Plenty of trines in the composite chart. In terms of aggressiveness, competition, power, success, or violence, it's moderately low, which I would expect if the two people to have compatibility. There's a relative absence of aspects of Mars to Saturn, Uranus, and Pluto, or of the Sun to Pluto between the two charts and in the composite chart. So then I concluded that chart number 1 and chart number 2 had the greatest compatibility between them. And so that was my choice for who's married, is charts 1 and 2, based on the synastry and the composite charts.
Well, thank you, Mitch. So we've got a different answer now from Mitch, and also a very different approach to answering the question from the way Richard broke it down. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that all shakes out. But thank you. Very, very interesting analysis. Now we're going to go on to Alan. And Alan's going to present, again, a Vedic viewpoint.
Okay, so the way I approach this is the way that I deal with many a client who comes to me saying, when will I get married and when will I have children? And I say, whoa, pump the brakes. Let's ask ourselves, will you get married and will you have children? So I tried to do a forced distribution with these 3 charts to see what I thought about their prospects for A, marriage, and B, children. So in chart number 1, Leo rising, sidereal chart, needless to say, Leo rising, the sun, first lord, has gone to the 7th house. That's a bias for marriage. Rahu, which is some measure of compulsion in the 7th house, also a bias for marriage. Venus, the Karaka generic significator, is in the 6th, and that can be problematic, but as we all know, lots of people have a bias for marriage and still have marital relationships. 7th house lord, Saturn, is exalted and bright, being retrograde. So that's a sign of strength for a relationship. The Sun, first lord, and Saturn, 7th lord, are in an almost exact trine to each other. That is also positive. Does this person have passion for relationship? Special aspects, Saturn aspects the moon, that's a passion combo. Venus and Mars are together, that's a passion combo. For those of you who are not familiar with this notion, and you wouldn't be unless you'd taken a course with Hart Defoe, passion combos arise when you've got the bad boys of the astrology group, Mars and Saturn, influencing the girls of the zodiac, Moon and Venus. On the score of children, have a look at 5th lord, Jupiter, is exalted, albeit in the 12th house, but note that there is an exchange going on here between Moon and Sag and Jupiter in Cancer. So effectively, once you swap in your mind's eye, Jupiter, the generic indicator for children, right back into the 5th house, this is a compelling argument for children. And if you choose to look at the 12th house as a passion for sexual experience, the moon back in its own sign, adds further fuel to the fire that this person has, passion for relationship. Okay, that's all I needed to say about number 1. In other words, this one is a candidate for both marriage and children. Chart number 2, ascendant lord, moon, in the 9th house, and as Richard rightly points out, mutual reception going on between Jupiter and the moon. So that actually strengthens the personality, if you like, of chart number 2, either with an exalted Jupiter in the 1st house or post-exchange the moon back in its own sign, both positive. As far as the partner goes, 7th lord is Saturn, again in this case, which is exalted, which is associated with its friend and Karaka, or generic significator for relationship, Venus. That's a good sign. As Richard also notes, there is a planetary war between these two. Saturn and Venus being within 1 degree of longitude of each other creates so-called planetary war, which generates friction, but friction among whom? Venus is the 4th lord, somebody's mother, well, the mother of chart number 2, and the partner of chart number 2 is indicated by Saturn. So chart number 2, they might very well have a relationship in which their marital partner and their mother do not get along. But otherwise, this is not an impediment of any consequence for a relationship. Then on the score of candidacy for children, Mars is in its own sign in the 5th house. That's certainly positive. If we needed any other corroboration or support, note that Jupiter, a strong Jupiter, by the way, aspects that Mars and gives further weight to the notion that this person could well have children. Let's see if I got anything against this. A passion combo exists here with the conjunction of Saturn and Venus, albeit with some negative ramifications, but maybe not for the passion, maybe for the intrafamilial relationships. Okay, I think that's all I need to say about that one. These two, in my opinion now, thus far I've got to the point where both chart number 1 and chart number 2 are definitely candidates for marriage and definitely candidates for having children as well too. Let's apply the same test to chart number 3 and see what we get there. No, chart number 3. Okay, so right away when I see Aquarius rising and I see, well, Saturn, the Lord, exalted, all on its own with no mutual aspects, at least insofar as the Vedic aspects are concerned. Saturn on its own in the ninth house, you know, I think of this person as a bit of a solitary. Then when I see Mars in the first house, it triggers the notion of Kuja dosha in my mind. And the rules for this, by the way, are if Mars is found in the first, the second, the fourth, the seventh, the 8th, or the 12th, okay, admittedly, that's 6 out of 12 houses. That's a bit of a spoiler for relationship on the with the notion that Mars is a shit disturber. If that's not enough evidence for you, though, we also look at Mars' position with respect to the moon and ask, is it in 1, 2, 4, 7, 8, or 12 from the moon? It is. It's 12th away. And again, from the perspective of Venus, is it 1, 2, 4, 7, 8, or 12 from Venus? And it is again. So this is what we call a threefold or full-blown Kuja dosh, a spoiler for a relationship, because this person is too commandeering or adventurous or a shit disturber or doesn't want to abide by anybody's rules but their own. Mars in the first house is, you know, very driven. Rahu in the first, you know, creates a bit of a compulsion to be self-serving, and Ketu in the seventh is a bit of a bias for negligence of the partner. When we come to looking at the prospect for children, Mercury rules the fifth house. Sorry, I'm just pointing over at the Vedic chart. Excuse me, those of you who are Western and watching this. Gemini rule is the fifth house. Mercury rules the fifth. Mercury is in Pisces, therefore debilitated. So the Lord of children is debilitated. Okay, it is with a couple of benefics, Moon and Venus, one of whom is exalted, but this Moon is very dark as well too. So I'm not convinced of the prospects here for children. Oh, this points out one thing I forgot to mention earlier. Seventh Lord Sun is in the very last degree of Pisces. This is a term, what we call Gandanta, very vulnerable to tipping over. So this is a weak prognosis for partnership. Okay, I'm going to wrap it up.
Yeah, your time's up, Alwin.
Considered, charts 1 and 2 are married. Chart 3 is the oddball out.
Thank you so much for that. And now, ladies and gentlemen, for the big reveal. We've got all our answers in, and I'm said I've gotten some really good answers from people online as well. Now, I want to say that everything that I say about these charts, you know, is suspect because I know the answers, and I'm the one to put the quiz together. And you know, first and foremost, our number one concern is security and secrecy and keeping the integrity of the quiz. So I'm going to say as little as possible about, you know, where I got them or how. But I also want to confirm that once I decided my modus operandi, I tried to keep it random. In other words, I took the first examples that met my criteria without any consideration of what the astrology was. That simply did not entrench it. And in fact, once I made the decisions and later looked at the actual astrology of the charts, from my perspective, I thought it was pretty dead obvious. In fact, I thought it was pretty easy. And I found a range of different ways of interpreting the question and interpreting the answers. And I want to share that with you. We've seen what our three speakers have presented. I'm going to go to screen share right now and show you just some of the comments that we got online. And actually, most of them were dead on. So I hope you are seeing a Word file right now that says East meets West comments. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
Now I'm going to tell you, charts 1 and 2 are married to each other, and chart 3 is a stranger, and I want to get this right because I just double checked them. I think chart number 1 is the woman, and chart number 2 is the husband, the one that everybody said had such dignity and so much Jupiter. That was the husband. Now, for the record, chart 3 is someone who's also married, but not to the other 2. And as far as I know, also has children. But that's about all I can really say about that. And I think we get, right off the bat, we can see some of the, the better ways in maybe to answering that question. Now, there's a fellow named Prashant Patni in Mumbai, who is obviously Indian, but he practices like Western astrology in kind of an Indian mindset, and he uses a tropical zodiac. So he pointed out things like, he got the right answer, and he said that they have, charts 1 and 2 have a lot of synastry with each other. Sun and moon are conjunct. That really surprised me. Again, I had no astrological considerations when I chose the charts, but when I looked at their sun and moon were conjunct in one of their 5th houses. And to me, that was pretty obvious. Sun 2 and moon of 1. So, and in fact, it's a mutual. I think they're like moon in Pisces, sun in Capricorn, and sun in Capricorn, moon in Pisces. So it's very, very mutual. And I didn't hear many of the astrologers commenting about that. Some of you did, but I think that's like the big stuff, the bread and butter stuff that jumps out at somebody like me. Also, they have the same ascendant. In tropical signs, their ascendants are the same, and I think that's a great measure of compatibility as well. So Prashant also pointed that out. And again, those are all things that I noticed after I'd chosen the charts. I was thinking, have I made this too easy, actually? Now, Keith Wallacott, who's been really supportive of this process, he said, well, all 3 charts plug into each other in many respects. However, I would think that chart 1 and 2 are married with children. Chart 1 and 2 share the same zodiacal degree for their sun and moon. Again, he's going right to the obvious there. So I'm inclined to think that if 2 out of 3 knew each other, it would be chart 1 and 2. Chart 3 has K2 in the 7th, which one of our panelists pointed out, not great for marriage. And charts 1 and 2 have their 7th is more inclined to marriage. Okay, strong emphasis on their 5th houses. Yeah, again, that was something that jumped out at me. So my reasoning behind 1 and 2 is being married with children, and the 3rd chart being a no. So he got it right as well. Then we also heard from a lady named Steffi Keenan, who said the conjunction of the moon to this moon to moon, sun to sun. Again, the big stuff jumped out at her as well, even though she thought it was a little wide, but the mutual sun-moon conjunction really spoke to her. Also, she liked the combination of Capricorn and Pisces, and she went into, some of the, rationalizations behind that. Now, then we heard from this guy named, Jahan Ferrer. Let me back up there. And he got the right answer. So I think everybody that chimed in online got this right. But this is the stuff that jumped out at me because I right away put the 2 charts together. I really like doing bi-wheels. I like putting, one person's chart into the others and seeing if the angles pop. And the angles in these 2 really pop. Not only do they have the same ascendant, but the woman has her Venus on the husband's ascendant, and they both got like Saturn, Uranus down there at the IC together. So that really spoke to me. And that's what this guy, Jahan Laferriere, pointed out. I see possibilities between all 3, but 1 and 2 are the most obvious choice. Strong angle conjunctions. Again, that really jumped out at me and made me almost regret choosing these because I thought I'd made them too easy. Okay, but he picked up on the strong angle conjunctions. There's something that he would look for. Number 2 has Saturn and Venus conjunct the IC, while number 1 has Venus conjunct number 2's descendant. So there's like an immediate attraction between them. The Sun Moon exact conjunction also falls in both people's 5th house, okay, along with some other planets which would indicate children. So I wanted to share this with you because I think in a lot of ways they kind of summed up my own thinking on this. And I'm Western, but I'm like a real sun in the second house kind of person. I look for the big stuff, the big, dumb, obvious stuff, and I have a way of, I think, getting more out of that than you know, maybe most people in some way. It's a second house thing. So yeah, the conjunctions to the angles, the sun moon combos in the fifth house, that to me was really obvious. Now let's see what people have to say about these. Aria says, what I loved in these interpretations is that we see the blending of Vedic with Western to be so accurate and insightful. Yeah, anybody got any more comments on that point? Because it's a good one. In other words, like both systems are giving good answers, but they're giving them like in different ways. For instance, if you put them into a Vedic whole sign houses, the angles don't necessarily pop in the same way. And then Teresa's saying sun moon conjunction within 2 minutes. I agree. If you want to turn on your mic and actually chime in, you can unmute it yourself by clicking on your mic icon in the bottom left of your screen. We would love to hear from you. And I'm getting some more comments. And Alan and Richard, oh, Richard, let me turn your mic on.
Brian has a comment.
Yeah, I just want to turn on Richard's mic. Okay. So, Brian, well, the two that got it were using Western and sidereal. Sidereal is not necessarily Vedic, and Alan would have to speak to that. I hear him using Vedic terminology, but sidereal can go either way, and he says he has no mark there. Alan, would you like to speak to that? I think you're Vedic.
Yes, I mean, I presented that chart in circular form for the benefit of viewers, but I'm still looking at it through the eyes strictly from a Vedic point of view. In other words, Vedic aspects, special aspects for Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, and other considerations, you know, this notion of Kuja dosha, a spoiler for a relationship, or Gandanta, when a planet is in the first or last degree of a sign, and so on.
Well, and I think classify Alan as somewhere like, you know, hardcore Vedic, right of center. But at the same time, we did have a comment thanking you, Alan, for presenting the chart in both forms, you know, with the circular form alongside, so that Western astrologers could visually get their heads around it. That was actually really helpful. Thanks for doing that. And maybe that's something that we want to try to incorporate more going forward. Because believe it or not, for us Westerners, when you put the chart in a square, we don't even know where to start.
Yeah.
Frankly, if you work in North Indian mode, switching over to South Indian is a challenge, and you have to reacquaint yourself with it.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, maybe that's something we want to look at more in the future is how we're actually presenting those charts to the audience. And somebody's saying, good point. I love that. I'm sorry, I don't forget. I don't recall.
Aria.
Yeah, Aria is saying that, but I'm not sure which point she's referring to, but maybe she'll refresh us on that. Gary's saying, in both Vedic and Western charts, the seventh lord, Saturn, is in the same sign in charts 1 and 2. Yeah, and they're not even a year apart in birth, but that works out for them. And I think that's part of the attraction to people with the same rising sign. You know, is if you're anywhere near the same age, then you know maybe your seventh house lord is going to be in the same sign. So that is a point of possible attraction. Okay. I thought it was very interesting to see the difference between the way Richard and Alan approached the question and the way Mitch approached it. Mitch was looking at compatibility between the charts. And I'm the same way. That's why I put them together in like a bi-wheel. I want to see how they interact with each other. Whereas both Richard and Alwin were looking at the individual charts to try to determine their chances of getting married and their chances of having children. And you know, think about it. That's really revealing, because we're the two Westerners and they're the two Vedic ones, and we're looking at points of compatibility. Or the composite sort of relationship. That's an important difference, even in approach, even in interpreting the question itself. We've got another comment from Arya. What I found powerful is changing the question. Instead of asking, are they married? Is there a personality fit for marriage or for children? Yeah, and that's the approach that both Richard and Alwin took. And that's a little different from the way Mitch answered the question or framed the question. And it's more along the lines of how I framed the question: who's the most compatible? And here's you know, the guy Jahan for that wrote in, one of the first questions he asked was this an arranged marriage or was it a love marriage? Because as Mitch pointed out, like, compatibility is not necessarily the main element in a marriage. And it didn't really factor in my considerations. I was looking at, are they married? Do they have children? I don't care how well they get along, because for me, marriage is external. Like, they have the same last name, you know, they bought a house together. Those are the Joneses that live down the street, you know, they have children. That's an external entity. That's not any kind of a comment of how well they get along or how compatible they actually are, but they've actually tied the knot and created a social unit, an institution, and that's what I'm looking for. And as Mitch pointed out, the compatibility might not necessarily get you there. It might point you toward who's having an affair, you know?
Courtney, that's a good point.
Yes, Jagdish.
However, I have, you know, when I looked at these two charts, chart 2 and 3, when I look at them, as Richard pointed out, both have the moon in Uttar Bhadrapada. And moon compatibility gives 36 points according to Vedic astrology, you know, the same nakshatra. I know the Mars are not very well placed between 2 and 3, you know, I can understand that. But the whole idea of, you know, so when I look at the, you know, the moon, the sun in for the second chart conjuncts the moon with the first chart, that's, you know, in the Western astrology, that's great, but both are in the Mula nakshatra. And sure, they could be married, but it's a drag on marriage. In a way, you know. So there's a point, but your point is well taken. If you're married, doesn't matter whether they're, you know, how it's going. But I wouldn't be surprised.
Is their name on the mailbox or not? That's what I'm asking.
Exactly, right, yeah. But how was the marriage? I would have, I would doubt if the marriage is really good. And, you know, so that's the only consideration I have.
And that's the kind of thing that's almost unknowable too, unless we really, you know.
And I can understand that it's a you know, all three charts are from the Western culture. If they were from the, you know, if the same charts were in, answer would be very different. You know, actually, a real life answer would be very different. That's my.
But all other things being equal, I think most people got it right. You know, most people, and as I said, once I really looked at the charts, which I absolutely did not do before I chose them, I thought, oh, I've erred. I've chosen something that's like way too obvious.
And one thing might have made a little bit more clear that the stranger may have the children. You know? Yeah,
as to the best of my knowledge, the stranger is also married to someone else, and you know, and that's, you know, to some extent, that's almost neither here nor there. Now we're getting more comments from Arya, and I want to, thank you, Jagdish. And again, if anybody wants to turn on their mic, we're happy to hear from you. Arya was saying, because to me, I thought maybe the person in the third chart could be a personality who might elope and have a complicated marriage personality. So they might get married and not be happy, but 1 and 2 would have a happier marriage, okay?
Right.
And they're going to have a happier marriage because of all the obvious compatibility factors that kind of jump out at you. And Byron says, it's a good test, but the frame of the question shapes the answers. Yeah, and that's personal. You know, and I find this a lot already in this process, that people frame the questions differently. And some frames are more efficient or effective than others, you know? So that's a really good point. By horary rules, there's almost no synastry. The chart of the wedding is the contract governing the relationship. Yeah, but that's kind of an abstract proposition. People still got to live together. And that's where the compatibility comes in day after day after day. So I don't know. A Jyotish might pair up 2 people, but if the better potential match is not known to either party, then that becomes a red herring. You know, somebody raised that point too, that, you know, theoretically, if I'm just choosing charts at random, which is what I'm doing, theoretically, I might choose a 3rd chart that's more that looks astrologically more compatible with the married couple. But that's where my take on it comes in. I'm not even looking at compatibility. I want to know, did they do the deed? Did they sign the contract? Did the kids, you know, call them mom and dad? Do they own the house together? You know, that's, for me, that's the question.
Well, had you picked the 3rd chart was more compatible than the other with 1 or 2, I would have picked it then. But I based my entire decision on the compatibility between the 3 pairs.
Yeah, yeah. And even though there were some random compatibilities there with the 3rd chart, overall, the preponderance of indicators pointed to the other 2. Because in fact, the other 2 are married and have children. You know, and not to number 3, who is a man. We're getting some more comments in here. Yes, well, okay, he says, well, I'm typing, you just said already. I would have bet money that one of those charts was Dean Redyar or something.
Yeah, Rahul again.
Okay, is Rahul in here? Yeah, Dean Redyar. Okay. Point.
Last time you picked Rahul for a criminal, so.
Yeah, that's right. I did. Rahul was one of our test charts in the last one. You know, it's not easy to find test questions where you can find charts that people can't really find anywhere. It's not easy. So I'm asking everybody to help me with that. So yeah, you never know whose chart we're going to use for these. And Arya's saying, how would that factor into an affair? Maybe. For example, soulmates are people who have lived together for, you know, maybe. And people marry for different reasons, okay? Throughout history, but even today. You know, one person's, especially in the West where we choose our own mates, one person's idea of what makes a good marriage partner may be completely at odds with another person's idea of what they're, you know, and what they're going to find satisfaction with. And again, that's why Sun in the 2nd house, I kind of prefer my approach of like, did they do the deed? Did they tie the knot? You know, did they have both their names on the mortgage? That's what I want to know, and not who they're chasing after in their dreams. That's a little harder to determine. Thank you guys for all of that. Any more comments or questions before we move on to our
I'd like to add a comment, Courtney. Just a takeaway for me from this, and just, you know, reviewing the result. That Moon-Sun conjunction between the 2 is something that I don't know how I missed it, and I think I missed it due to focusing on trying to, you know, formulate an argument around the approach of whether or not the charts showed the promise of marriage and all of that. So, you know, I can see exactly why you might have thought that it was actually too obvious, because such moon-sun conjunctions are extremely common, you know, amongst couples. So I actually, in retrospect, see that it would have been useful to spend more time on the synastry angle, you know, because I'm surprised I missed that, and that for me is a good lesson in this. And you know, I remember when looking at these charts, and I mentioned you know, that bit of concern around the fact that chart number 1, if they were born 10 minutes earlier, would have a Cancer ascendant. I remember that it struck me that that would make chart number 1 and 2's ascendants the same sign in the sidereal picture, which did also look to me then as something that would have increased the compatibility between them. And you know, one thing that did throw me there was the conjunction between the moons of chart 2 and 3, you know, which looks very compatible, right? And is kind of comparable to the moon-sun conjunction between chart 1 and 2. And you know, when I first read the question with this, I did, you know, feel a little uncomfortable about the question of trying to figure out from these charts whether people would know each other or not. You understand? Like if chart 2 and 3 had met, maybe the moon conjunctions would have resulted in something. Do you understand? I don't know if I'm phrasing this clearly, but I guess the question is, can we astrologically see from 2 charts whether or not these people would know each other at all? It's one thing to pose the question of whether or not they'd be compatible, but how would we know from astrology whether 2 people were likely to meet at all or not?
That's a tough question to answer with all the millions of people that there are in the world, and the, you know, even thousands of people that are born every day, you know?
Sure, I understand. And my question is, you know, whether it's an appropriate factor to bring into such a quiz. Do you understand? To decide whether or not 2 people would not have met, because that seems to me somewhat unknowable. I mean, I get the value of trying to assess which 2 would be more likely to be married. Do you understand? But
and that's I think the quest.
Yeah, sure. It's the central point. I understand. I was just aware of the fact that we can't really know astrologically whether people have met or not.
Right.
You know,
yeah, I think that would be, that's like one of those questions of, you know, one of our students wanted to analyze all of the charts of the people who died on the Titanic, right, and see if they had a common factor in their chart. You know, it's an argument that's been raised against astrology for thousands of years. And I think from my perspective, you know, we have to accept the limits sometimes of what we're doing. There's some things that, you know, maybe astrology isn't the best tool.
Absolutely. I think what I'm saying is that if we were looking at 3 charts of people who had met, right, then it would mean that if chart 2 and 3 had met each other, perhaps those 2 moons could have sparked something. Do you understand? The fact that they didn't meet means that the potential that was there between them, you know, couldn't be realized. You know, it was all latent.
Well, I'm going to refer you back to Mitch's analysis, where he was specifically looking at compatibility between the charts, and he said, yeah, there's some points of compatibility between, was it 2 or 3 or 1 and 3, but the preponderance of indicators was between
1 and 2.
1 and 2. And again, it's all in how you frame the question and what you're trying to get to. And the question, which I tried to state clearly, is like 2 of these people are married to each other with children, and 1 is, you know, unknown to the other 2. So I think, you know, one of the things we're learning in this process is a lot depends on how you define the question and how you're going to get to the answer. But we've got all that for posterity now, and it was a good exercise. Let's go on to the next one. Now, it was Keith Willicott who proposed, because I keep asking for help with the Astro questions. He said, you know, maybe we could do a simple question that would cause people to focus on a Western tropical answer versus an Indian Lahiri answer. And so that's how I came up with the second quiz, which is a simple, what's my profession quiz. And I presented the chart in the Western tropical zodiac with Placidus houses, and then I presented the chart in the Lahiri with whole sign houses to try to see, you know, roughly which system might produce the better answers. Okay, so I think we'll try to do the same process. We'll go to Richard, and then to Mitch, and then to Alwin. Okay.
All right. Can you see it?
Yes.
That looks
Okay.
good.
All right. Now, when it comes to matters of profession, I'm inclined to give the first house quite a lot of attention, along with the 10th house, which is the obvious place to look to. And it's conspicuous to me that we have Uranus on the ascendant, and definitely in the first house of the sidereal whole house chart. And that Uranus on the ascendant does, well, it does present some interesting possibilities. You know, I mean, the person could even be an astrologer having that, but it kind of points to a person who could be quite, you know, pioneering, obviously. Having Uranus so prominent could easily make a person, you know, good with technical stuff, technology, and so on. And what I find interesting here too is whether you use the tropical or sidereal charts, you end up having the first house ruler in the 6th house. Okay, so this to me is another indication of a person who is practical and can work with you know, stuff that requires attention to detail, things that are technical. In fact, in the Vedic or sidereal whole house chart, both the first house ruler and the 10th house ruler end up in the 6th house, and that, you know, among the obvious possibilities there would be medical work of some kind. The person could be a doctor or therapist of some sort. There's definitely an emphasis on the 6th house somehow or other, you know, in the description here of this person's profession. Having South Node in the 10th house could support the idea of a person working in a perhaps a healing field. Even the moon in the 12th can support the idea of there being, you know, involvement in institutions like prisons or hospitals or something along those lines. So look, it's you know, I'm sure you'd understand and sympathize with the fact that there's many specific possibilities that would all conform to certain, you know, general principles or patterns in the chart. It is a guess, but it looks to me like this person is possibly involved in a medical field, and certainly, you know, I see Jupiter and Uranus are also in a close trine, and you know that Mercury in the 7th house, being angular, does strengthen this person's communication skills. People with Mercury in the 7th are often like salespeople. They're good at encountering or confronting people with information. And also another factor is that the 1st and 10th lords are in the nakshatra called Shravana, which itself is associated with with universities and you know, students and languages in particular. So there, you know, if it's not in a medical field, it somehow could be that this person is very learned and you know, a speaker or lecturer of some kind. Anyway, I think those are my impressions.
Thank you, Richard. That was very concise.
I found Richard's logic to be interesting. We come to similar conclusions using different approaches, and that's very interesting to me. Again, I'm using an equal house system, so the midheaven is not the 10th house cusp. I'm separating the public visibility and status of the midheaven from the consideration of the job or profession, which is the 10th house cusp. So I'm going to start with a consideration of the dispositor network, starting with the 10th house cusp. And then if necessary, in doing a vocational analysis, I proceed with consideration of planets and signs and houses, and I did in this case. So I start first with the dispositorships and look at the 10th house cusp is in Gemini, which is ruled by Mercury. I then look at Mercury in the 6th in Pisces, which is ruled by Jupiter and Neptune. So I've got both the traditional and the modern rulers there. Jupiter and Neptune, in this case, both happen to be in the 8th in Taurus, which is ruled by Venus. And Venus is in the 5th in Aquarius, ruled by Saturn and Uranus. Saturn in the 8th is in Taurus, and that gives it one feedback loop. And then Uranus is in the 12th in Virgo, almost on the ascendant, or really on the ascendant, conjunct to the ascendant. It's ruled by Mercury, and that's another feedback loop. So we have a very prominent Mercury. I keep hitting my button, sorry. We have a very prominent Mercury in this case, and that tells me that the native would be contented if the workplace stimulates ideas, imagination, communication. There's a need to express thoughts, perhaps related to publication, doing peer-reviewed articles or writing books or something along those lines. It's a place where one can continue to learn and grow intellectually. After considering the dispositor networks, I looked at the planets and the signs and the houses. And one of the first things I noticed is that Capricorn is on the 5th house cusp. And that told me that the native might be interested in intellectual activities, reading, writing, exchanging ideas, or investigating a special subject. Mars is in the 10th house. That tells me that whatever profession, one would be very persistent, vigorous, active, and dominant. They're likely to possess executive qualities. What was most telling to me is that the ruler of the 10th is in the 6th house. And that tells me that his professional success is related to ideas on service. And no matter what profession, it will be more gratifying helping others. And so this astrological position favors professions to medicine, therapy, or nutrition. Gemini is on the 10th house cusp, and that lends me to think about a doctor, a professor of medicine, an administrator, a writer, a publicist, a pediatrician, a child psychologist, a speaker, a journalist, an actor, a pharmacist, a biochemist, a merchant of perfumes or food, etc. But to me, context matters. And this person was born in 1882, so that cuts out some of the professions here that I would otherwise consider. I don't believe pediatricians were a specialty at that point. There were no child psychologists to my knowledge at that point. This is the time of Freud, and psychotherapy is just coming to fruition. Doubtful biochemist as a profession. So that limits some of the professions down that I would consider there. So that led me to ask, what's in common between the ruler of the 10th and the 6th house and Gemini on the 10th house cusp? And that led me to believe, that led me to think that the person is either involved in medicine, a professor of medicine, or a doctor. And my surmise, and I zipped through the slides by accident, my surmise is that the person is a physician, a man of medicine.
Okay, so we
so I-
have some
yeah.
agreement between
All right,
our first two.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Well, let's see what Alan has to say on this.
We have agreement, but we have a difference in our way of approaching it.
Well, yeah, and that's always interesting.
See my screen there?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so some similarities with both Richard and Mitch. So Ascendant Lord Sun has gone to the 6th house, medicine or litigation. 10th Lord Venus has gone to the 6th house as well. And again, I think, medicine, healthcare, the litigation arena. The strongest planet in the chart is the moon in its own sign in the 12th house. And as far as institutions go, that will govern places like hospitals, prisons, ashrams, and other institutions of, rest and rehabilitation. So thus far, I'm getting a bias for medical expertise. If we look at what planets are angular, here I'd like to flip over to the North Indian chart, which really makes the angular planets pop out. Mercury in the 7th, Rahu and Ketu, the nodes in the angles as well. Rahu and Ketu are often associated with technologies of some kind, emerging technologies of the day, and the use of science and technology. It's certainly compatible with the notions of medicine, but Rahu Ketu also has some association with sort of occult stuff. And one thought that just went fleeting through my mind was the notion of mesmerism or hypnotism as a kind of an occult science of the day, especially as Moon is there in the 12th house, having to do with sleep or temporary loss of consciousness. And I also thought of Freud too, and I think it was Glenn that stimulated, or Mitch that stimulated that notion. Moon in the 12th is associated with sexuality. But primarily I'm sticking with the notion of medicine as being significant. There's further support for that too. There's a method for highlighting key planets that we call career pointers. Again, something that I learned from Hart Defoe. Prime among them is the Moon, occupies the 12th and aspects the 6th house. And note the 6th, which we've already gone to because the Ascendant Lord and the 10th Lord have gone there as well. Venus is another one of these career pointers, and I can't get into explaining that methodology, but take my word for it. Moon, Venus, and Saturn are career pointers. Venus occupies the 6th house. And then Saturn is the 3rd career pointer, admittedly somewhat weak because it's debilitated, but it is elevated, in fact, one of the more elevated planets. And Saturn both owns and by special aspects the 6th house as well too. So we get a lot of concentration here in the 6th house. And I, debated law as a field, but I'm back again to thinking of medicine as being the most likely one, and maybe, in the day, leading edge technology. Something maybe Mitch said about, biochemistry. I think of, what's his name, Harvey, the guy who first determined, the role of blood in the body. And I have no idea of his birth date. It's just occurred to me and I have no time to look it up. But anyway, if I have to choose something, I'm on to medicine or some science of somewhere focused around healthcare.
Okay. Thank you. We actually have agreement between all of our presenters, and I'm thankful to say, and if you can turn off the screen share for a second, Ellen. I'm very thankful to say that actually they're all correct. I'm going to bring Mitch up. You all came to roughly the same conclusion using different methods. And again, in choosing the question and choosing the chart, once I determine what could reasonably be done, I try to take randomly the first example that fit my criteria without any consideration of the astrology involved. And I think in this case, it resulted in what, from my perspective, is a Western tropical astrologer for the most part. I could see the chart going in a couple of different ways, but this is in fact a French physician who's a member of their National Academy of Medicine, so he wasn't exactly a simple country doctor, as we see from the chart. He's not only extremely, high status, but highly educated. Would have been writing, publishing, peer review, doing some research, but also involved in treating patients and the service aspects. I wish that I could say more about specifically what kind of medicine he did, but that information is not really available. We can certainly say that he was very innovative. And
the Mercury would indicate the publication in peer-reviewed publications.
And a very busy ninth house if you're using Placidus.
Right.
Again, a very academic career, a very high status career, but centered around central issues of medicine and healing, which I think everybody got really well. Again, I'm going to take a second and share some of the other answers that we got from people online. And again, Prashant, who is in Mumbai, but practicing in a more tropical Western vein, Uranus Lord, 6th Lord conjunct the ascendant. If you're using tropical, it's the rule of the 6th, it's conjunct the ascendant Uranus, but that's using the modern rulers, which is maybe a little controversial. Virgo and ascendant Lord Mercury in the 6th. I think everybody got that. And my one takeaway on this was the Mercury in the 6th would be in Pisces, and I had to wonder with that Uranus on the ascendant, perhaps there was some of his own sickness, his own weakness, maybe as a childhood illness that might have in some way inspired or propelled him along this particular career direction. He likes to work Virgo is conjunct fixed star Fomalhaut. I think he means the Mercury is conjunct Fomalhaut. Uranus so close to the ascendant gives an unorthodox, impulsive, innovative nature. The person will not like to follow the rules of society, but it is in Virgo, and it's the Uranus has got, I think, some very nice trines to it as well. So I think it would all in all have been a very functional Uranus, and perhaps very scientifically innovative. Sun and Uranus are trine to Neptune and Jupiter from the 9th, Placidus 9th. Yeah, that again, that shows the brilliance and the high academic profile of being in the National Academy, so to speak. Likes to explore. Now, interestingly, he came out with likely profession was the artist, musician, painter, singer, or an astrologer. So even though I think he was able to tell a lot about this person, didn't quite get to the correct profession, and that's kind of how I felt in retrospect, looking at knowing the answer beforehand. So my perspective on it is slanted, but I would again say in the tropical Western Placidus, this is a very high profile, high status, highly well-educated person, but did it necessarily lead to medicine? I think maybe Mitch and Alwin and Richard had a better way in to that. Keith had, again, some very interesting points. He says, a doctor who made breakthroughs in the realm of medicine. That's pretty concise. But he focused on the full moon, on the 6th and 12th axis, bringing his attention to illness and disease. The Lagna Lord, which is, I believe, the rising sign, in Venus in Shravana in the 6th. So like Richard, he's going to the nakshatras. And in the 6th in particular, and Shravana being a nakshatra, that would be scholarly and more universities, etc. It's surrounded by students, etc. Vishnu is connected to Shravana. Lord Vishnu brings brilliance and equilibrium, potentially to illness in this case, hence the doctor. Uranus on the ascendant, trine Jupiter. Now here he is a very traditional Vedic astrologer, and suddenly he's talking about Uranus on the ascendant, trine Jupiter. Wait a minute. So we have a lot of neo-Vedic astrology going on here. Trine Jupiter makes for a creative innovator. So if they were a doctor and had an innovative breakthrough, surely it would be in the realm of medicine. Yeah, I'm going to mute your mic for a second there, Alan. Lord of the 10th is in the 6th, so profession is tied to the 6th house activities. And Keith, I think, hit a home run here where he pointed out that the moon is in Aslasha. So it often deals in drugs or poisons, which added to my thinking about medical work. So I think he did a good job of using those nakshatras to great advantage there. Did we have, okay, and that was the last of the ones that we had online. So now let's go to some of our comments here. And again, if you want to try to turn on your mics, you can still unmute yourself. Okay. Didn't scholars of that era study the arts, music? Well, yeah, you're going to have to assume he would have had maybe a well-rounded education, but you know, we don't really know.
Well, with Gemini, there's the possibility of having a second vocation.
Or with Uranus on the ascendant too. Yes,
well, that's why I mentioned, you know, the publications, being a writer, it plays together with the medicine, having Mercury, having two vocations.
And for all we know, maybe what Prashant found there might have been relevant. You know, maybe he was a skilled musician as well. I can't speak to him. I don't know. And Jagdish says, I thought this person is a researcher or scientist, more towards the academic area, of course, very famous. And well, yeah, I think eminent, you know, high profile, of a national ranking, so to speak. But certainly a researcher and academic, but in the field of medicine, you know. And again, in tropical with Placidus, you get that strong ninth house. You know, the Jupiter trine Uranus from the ninth house, which really speaks to, you know, high profile academic. Okay. But again, everybody got that one right.
I actually think that this is a very wonderful result, really, that so many people were able to be that specific about the area of you know, the person was in. You know, it wasn't a case of having to choose, you know, between two charts. There were many possibilities. So I think it's really quite a validation for astrology, really. I'm very glad to see that it's been, you know, that there wasn't a huge divergence, you know, in the conclusion that we arrived at.
Well, and perhaps one of the reasons was, no matter whether you did the chart in the tropical zodiac or used a sidereal zodiac, the ruler of the 1st and the 10th ended up in the 6th house.
Right, exactly.
No matter how you sliced it. And that's not always going to be the case. You know? I mean, very often.
Indeed. Though, in the, let's have a look here. Right, yes, I see in the Western tropical chart, the Sun and Venus are on the 5th. Right. Okay, so.
But now, but Mercury is the ruler in the Western, and Mercury.
Yeah, sure.
But in Pisces, in the 6th. That's why I said perhaps, you know, his own constitution had been weak as a child, and that, you know, perhaps, we don't know.
Right.
But no matter how you slice it, the ruler and the ruler of the 1st and the 10th ends up in the 6th, because Mercury in the tropical zodiac is going to rule the 1st and the 10th, and it's in the 6th. Whereas in the Lahiri pole sign, it's Sun and Venus, and they're both in the 6th.
Right.
So that, again, that's not always going to be the case. And I chose this chart at random. Just, it was the first one that came up that met my qualifications. But it just happened to work out that way.
if I was reading from the tropical chart, the debilitation of the ascendant lord would have made me doubt that this person would, you know, rise to some sort of eminence. You know, it would point to a medical direction, but the debilitated ascendant lord in the 6th house isn't, it can kind of keep a person kind of servile, you know. It doesn't point to them attaining much. This is the
That's
one
what I
difference
was
there
thinking.
that
Maybe as a
comes to
child
mind.
had been kind of sickly. His own health might not have been.
Right.
That was my take on it. But see, and I wish we could answer that question.
Right.
But we can't. But yeah, it's a fair enough point. At the same time, if it's Leo rising in Lahiri, then the sun is in Aquarius in the 6th.
Capricorn.
In Capricorn.
Is it Capricorn? Okay, I thought it was Aquarius. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
It's Aquarius in the tropical. Okay, so it's not debilitated. Well, that's an interesting point. That's a real interesting point then. So actually the chart ruler in the 6th is stronger in the Lahiri zodiac.
Right.
Yeah, that's an interesting point.
It's not very strong. You know,
It's what we call ordinary. There's no sun in Capricorn has no dignity.
Yeah.
But it's still not debilitated the way Mercury in Pisces would be.
Correct. But now we're going back and forth between two charts now, sidereal and zodiac.
Yeah, well, I think it's a fair point, because if we were asking a simple question like which one looks more successful, the Lahiri would look at least a little bit more successful than the tropical. At the same time, I mean, the tropical's got, you know, some good stuff, so to speak. So yeah, but going on ascendant ruler, yeah, the ascendant ruler is stronger in Lahiri. We've got another comment. Yeah, Prashant saying if anyone knew this person, we might have noticed other interests. I agree. That's a fair point. And again, someone as obviously, you know, brilliant with as much mental capacity, you know, may well have been an accomplished musician of some kind. You know, we don't know. We don't know. So, but you're right. It's entirely possible. And then Ari's got to run, but she's thanking us for so much fun and participation and expertise from all of you guys. And Teresa's saying the sun in the 6th is more powerful because it makes a close trine to the 10th cusp and is conjunct the 10th lord. I can't argue with that. You know, I think that's a really good point. That certainly in the Lahiri Ayanamsha, this chart looks more successful. Can't argue with that.
Yeah, also the angular Mercury, you know, was for me a key indication that this person would be articulate, eloquent, you know, would be likely to be a speaker, and so I find the fact that this wasn't just, like, as you put it, a country doctor. It was somebody who was very involved in the academic world at that time.
Yeah,
was kind of, in my opinion, shown, or at least supported by that Mercury becoming angular along with the 6th house emphasis, you know, coming from the Sun and Venus rather than from Mercury. You know, and then that, I think, also very interestingly, you know, Shravana Nakshatra has this distinct association with universities, literally. And
well, the nakshatras are really interesting. Look, to me, the Aslesha, I think, is something everybody overlooked but Keith, but it's a really good point. It's a really good point.
Right.
The moon in Aslesha, yeah. The full moon in Aslesha. Yeah. You know, I have to say, I think we're all kind of inching towards this idea that maybe that Vedic chart is a little stronger. At the same time, our buddy Mitch used the tropical chart to get to the right answer. and Mitch focused on dispositors. He started with dispositors.
That's the way I was trained by Noel Till.
Well, it got you to the right place. And that's kind of the point we're debating, is that, you know, which ruler is stronger. He was using rulers, but also dispositors. So, all right. Well, any more conclusions or takeaways from what we accomplished today and what we learned today? Because that was a lot. I myself am always impressed by what people can do in sidereal or the Lahiri and Ancha. I'm always struck by the different stories that the Placidus versus full sign houses tell, and that certainly was very evident in the second example. Anybody have any other concluding comments or takeaways from what we saw today?
Well, it's a good exercise and kind of a win-win scenario as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Richard. Go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, I just want to say I enjoyed the process, even though I got the first question wrong. I learned a lot from that and reviewing, you know, the information afterwards. And I'm very pleased with the result all round on the second question. As I said earlier, all the more because it wasn't a you know, a multiple choice question which you could get right by luck. You know, if you got the right answer here, it was because of accurately following a particular line of reasoning on the chart. And so I found the second question, you know, like I think the most valuable, and perhaps the greatest validation of, well, I would say of astrology generally. Yeah, of course, as I see it, the sidereal chart spoke a little bit more clearly, and it is true that you wouldn't always have this situation where you have the ascendant lord in the sixth house in both cases, but it's the fact that we all came to such a very specific conclusion that was correct that I think is a great sort of, you know, victory, I would say, for you know, testing what astrology can do. So thanks, Courtney.
It's a very impressive video, actually. You know, because and you are literally showing the steps that you took to get to those conclusions, and you know, there's some overlap, there's some similarity, but there's also some stark differences, and that's important. Now moving forward, because again, this whole East-West project, it's a process, it's ongoing. And we have another session scheduled for November. We have another one scheduled for the first Saturday in March, and we're already looking at another for possibly April or June. And we're bringing in different astrologers representing different backgrounds, and particularly in the Western backgrounds. There's a lot of diversity to cover there. Yeah, that's been a challenge.
Well, we got skunked last time.
That's true.
We didn't this.
No, Mitch, you were representing. Mitch was in the house.
I was representing last time too, but we got skunked last time.
Yeah, but you know, your slides were very concise, Mitch. You know, you just got in there and got right to the point. I
tried for laser-like focus.
You succeeded in that inimitable Capricorn style. You definitely.
Well, succeeded. everybody was very precise in their approach today. I mean, the presentations from Richard and from Alan were also equally laser-like in their focus.
Yes, And we've been upgrading the protocols because, again, we need protocols. We need, you know, research design in this. And one of the things that I've asked everybody, especially when you get a chance to review the videos, is to please send me your comments on it, your takeaways, your conclusions. What do you think really stands out? What, you know, because we want to start pulling those together on the pages where we post the videos. And I think by the time we get to April or June of next year, we're going to have a really interesting pile of information there. And I think certain conclusions are going to be repeated over and over, and again, certain things that don't work are going to be repeated over and over, and that's an important goal of this whole process. Along with, let's not understate the importance of, you know, producing a video of 3 very different astrological approaches to getting to the same answer that happens to be the right answer, which, as Richard pointed out, it's not a multiple choice. It's a tougher type of question. So our membership program will be starting up in a couple of weeks. I mean, probably 10 days. And all of this material will be freely available on our site up until that point. Thank you for bearing with us. I know the site's gone through different phases as we're setting it up, but it is quite a process. But we do try to keep everybody posted on that. Thank you all so much for coming in and for all of your comments and your support on this. And we hope to see you again the first Sunday in November, when Theo Knacker will be here, and who's the other Vedic?
First Saturday in November.
Sorry. Oh, Jagdish, you're on in November. That's who it is. Yes. Yeah, it's true. Yes. Okay. Well, good. I'm gonna sign off, and we'll start processing the recording and get this one up, because I think everybody will be happy to see that. Thank you so much, Richard, for coming in from South Africa.
Thank you.
And
Bye,
Alwin from Toronto, and Mitch over in Tallahassee, and Gary in Ireland, and Prashant in Mumbai, and you know, people from Gali's here from Israel, people coming in from all around the globe to see this. We hope to see you back again in November. And thank you so much to our panelists for such awesome work. Such a great job you guys did, slicing and dicing those charts and getting right to the answers. You've all taught us so much today.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah,
Thank you, Courtney. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All right. We'll see you next time around. Bye-bye.
Cheerio. Bye-bye.
Cheers.